How you doing? I don't know how you feel, but I'm pretty excited that tomorrow I get to cast my vote finally for Dr. Ron Paul. Well, we have here tonight another special guest as well. He's worked hard to make sure that Washington's Republican caucus is very important on the national stage, and that this will be a fair election that will guarantee an open process. And he is a conservative stalwart, Mr. Kirby Wilbur, Republican State Chair.
Thank you. Are you going to caucus tomorrow?
Yeah!
What are you going to vote for?
Ron Paul!
Who?
Ron Paul!
I didn't hear you.
Ron Paul!
Now, you have to remember tomorrow that there are two important steps in the caucus process. You want to vote in the straw poll, but you want to stay around to vote for delegates to the county convention. Because if you vote for Dr. Paul in the straw poll, but don't vote for his delegates going to the county convention, it's useless and meaningless. You really want to elect delegates for Ron Paul, but then we'll go to the county convention and the state convention to elect for Ron Paul delegates to the national convention. Don't forget, you want to stay for the straw poll, then you want to vote for your delegates as well. You know, I have met Dr. Paul in the past. Back in my old days when I was on the radio, I had him on as a guest several times. And I've got to tell you that I am incredibly impressed. I think he's a man of conviction and courage and character. And you never have to worry about where he stands. He stands for liberty. He stands for America. And he's here to talk to you tonight. So don't forget, caucus tomorrow, 10 a.m., vote in the straw poll, vote for your delegates, get there early, and please join me in giving a very warm Seattle welcome to Congressman Ron Paul.
Maybe nobody would show up, but thank you for coming. I appreciate that. I would like to introduce my wife, Carol. Get her report, Carol. And our granddaughter, Linda, who's been traveling with us. Thank you very much. Good day tomorrow. We're going to have a good day. We're going to get a few delegates, right? You know, they didn't think we were going to get any out of Wyoming, but we ended up with 6. That's not too bad. It's a good start. But we're going to do better than that here for sure. It is wonderful. You know, it's a tough struggle. You know, the Republicans need a little encouragement along the views of the ideas of liberty, and we've been working on that, but we're making a lot of progress. But you know where we've really made our progress, because the message of liberty is so broad-based and we reach so many. When you look at the job we have in the primary, that's one thing. But if you put our campaign and my name up against the president, guess what? We do the best. That should be understandable because of the message. You know, I've argued the case that if we truly have a philosophic revolution and move toward liberty, it will be bipartisan, because everybody should defend the cause of liberty, whether you're a liberal or conservative, maybe for different reasons, but liberty is the answer to our problem. And it's not so much that we're inventing it. I didn't invent it, but it's been around for a while. The best test of a free society has been the United States. And the consequence was that we became the richest and the most prosperous country in the world, the largest middle class. And yet we're slipping. We're not there anymore. Our middle class is shrinking. It's being divided. There's the rich against the poor. The wealth is being transferred from the poor to middle class to the very wealthy. They have the benefits. Guess who the most powerful group of people are in Washington? It's the lobbyists. They're the power people. They're the ones who are behind the scenes that run the show. So for us to have success in this country, people have to once again believe in the principles of the Constitution, believe in limited government, believe in a philosophy of free markets where you have property rights and contract rights, and above all else, sound money without a Federal Reserve System. A day off from campaigning this week, went by Washington, had a little meeting with our friend Ben. He said he was glad to see me. No, we talked a little bit about the important issues, and he more or less had to concede something, so he says, well, maybe we can talk a little bit more about competing concerns. Yeah, let us legalize the Constitution and compete against your funny money system. That's what we need to do. But we need, of course, a lot of changes, not only in monetary policy and economic policy, personal liberties, civil liberties. We need to redefine that and get the people concerned and interested in protecting that, as well as another major problem we've had. And unfortunately, these problems that we have has been too much bipartisan. You know, they say we need more compromise in Washington. We don't need more compromise because they've been compromising and both agreeing on big government, you know. But certainly it's been bipartisan. For years it was said that you should never disagree on foreign policy. But our foreign policy is a mess. It's costing us too much money and too many lives, and it's causing too much danger to our country. So this foreign policy needs to be changed to that of non-intervention, minding our own business, and not endorsing the principle of preventive war. You go to war only with a declaration of war. If we did that, we would be a much richer country. Our government has spent so much money in the last 10 years fighting wars that shouldn't have been fought that we are now an additional $4 trillion in debt because of it. So this means a greater burden. That's $4 trillion out of our economy. Just think how much richer we would be. But we are a poorer nation right now. We owe foreigners over $3 trillion, almost half of it to the Chinese. Our national debt is now nearly $16 trillion. We have a debt increase each year of $1.5 trillion. It's unsustainable. Anybody can realize this, and I think most people are starting to. And I think this is why there's been a shift in attitude. Yes, we had a little attention 4 years ago, but I've been talking about this for a long time, but it's never been like this before. These last 4 years have dramatically changed because people know that this financial crisis is not a little recession that we're going through, and they're not going to get out of this easily. And they also know that they're sick and tired of the wars, and that it's time that we just bring our troops home and mind our own business. You know, we get a lot of questions asked about the other candidates, and generally I don't say too much about them personally, unless I'm asked. Then I'm not afraid to say something. But I really think that whether it's the other Republican candidates or what we have, the individual we have in the White House, I sincerely believe that they represent the past. It's just past. It's not the present. The message of freedom, the message of limited government, it is the future. The future is ours, and I believe very sincerely that intellectually that we are winning this fight, and we will win it politically as well. But a lot of work has to be done, and you know, tomorrow might be a good place to start with a very powerful message around the country. We're still working our way through the primary. Obviously, the caucus states are better for us. And it'll take a couple of months, but tomorrow is a very important day, so I hope you can all participate and get out there. Of course, to me, what's dear to my heart is the message of liberty and the reason why, and trying to understand exactly the reasons how we got into this mess. It didn't happen overnight. It is so easy and to come down and say it was all Obama's fault. Well, he's caused a lot of trouble. There's no doubt it. And he certainly hasn't done us much good by wanting to have this Obamacare and things like that. But these problems are structural, and they've been going on for 100 years. But I believe that they started in the Woodrow Wilson era, got much worse in the Depression, but really got bad after 1971, when our Federal Reserve and our government permitted us to dislink our dollar in any way whatsoever to gold. That meant there were no restraints on spending, no restraints on borrowing, and therefore the Federal Reserve was always there to buy debt. So we're a debt-ridden society. Literally, the more debt they buy, the more money they can print. It makes no sense whatsoever. That means there's no limit. And they've been doing this. Some like to spend on domestic welfare, others like to spend on foreign welfare. And what happens to the people? The people lose their money. It's a sinister way of taxing the people. Yes, we have direct taxation, but there's a limit. If we had only taxation to pay all our bills, this would all come to an end. And that's what Jefferson wanted. He didn't want it to even borrow, and he certainly didn't want a central bank. But just think if everybody had to just write a check, routinely to pay the bills, there would be a revolution. It would be all over in no time. This is why I introduced a bill, knowing that it wouldn't go anywhere. I wanted to repeal withholding. And that meant that if the businessman wasn't forced to be the tax collector, I mean, we all bow down, we collect the taxes, pass them on. There's a discrepancy. We have to prove our innocence. It's a terrible, terrible system. And yet, if everybody had to write a check at the end of every month to pay the government, and we weren't allowed to go in debt, believe me, we would have a very, very small government, the kind of government we can live with. For some reason, we took the easy way out. And my best understanding of this is that freedom creates a lot of prosperity. So we were blessed with a lot of natural resources. We were blessed with a group of founders that wrote a pretty darn good constitution. Has problems, but really the best. And we ended up with a maximum amount of freedom and the prosperity. But then we as a nation looked at the prosperity when we became more materialistic. And that is, the material benefits became our driving force, and then special interest groups looked to the government for the redistribution, and we forgot about how it's made and produced. People have to produce wealth. Governments destroy wealth. They don't produce any wealth whatsoever. So then we institutionalized the redistribution of wealth through the tax system. We had 1913 was a bad year. We had the income tax. When the Republic returns, we'll repeal the 16th Amendment. We won't have any. And also, we've had the Federal Reserve System, the central bank that Jefferson argued against. We've had it for 99 years. And they lost 98% of the value of the dollar that they had in 1913. I'd say they were doing a pretty lousy job. So next year, when we have the opportunity, we should introduce or pass legislation that repeals, on the celebration of 100 years, let's repeal the Federal Reserve Act. Economic policy does absolutely require the change in monetary policy, but it has to be changed. Also, we have to have an understanding about markets, free markets, voluntary contracts. The government now interferes with more contracts than it protects. They're supposed to protect contracts, not set all the rules for the contracts. You know, I saw something this morning that was rather disturbing, and you'd think I would never be disturbed about big government growing, but there was a report that said that on January 1st, instead of us winning this fight in Washington and around our governments around the country of shrinking the size of government, there were 40,000 new laws put on the book in January this year. Now, what we need to work for is the day that we have a lot more to say about it. Possibly, I, as your president, would say... Maybe then our goal should be the repeal of 40,000 laws in 1 year. Nobody has the biggest idea of all the laws, and nobody can understand them all. And it came about because we've gotten so careless. You know, the Constitution is rather explicit. There's only one body that's allowed to write law, and that's the legislative branch. But guess what? Does the executive branch write law? All the time. They have executive orders and signing statements and regulations. Regulations have the force of law. And the worst thing is, if you disobey a regulation, you don't even get a fair hearing in court. You go to an administrative court. Then you have to prove yourself innocent. It's a terrible system. And yet courts themselves write legislation. And it's absolutely out of control. It bogs us down, makes it more difficult for our to compete. You add a regulatory burden, you add a tax burden, you add this monetary system that can do nothing but mischief for us and deceive us and mislead us and have the great burden of debt on our heads. So these kind of things have to be changed if we want to get our economy growing again. You can't have a growth in the economy that is overburdened with debt, and that is the big problem. Yet Keynesian liberal economic philosophy teaches that if there is a recession or depression, the problem is the people aren't spending enough money. What if you don't have a job? How are you supposed to spend money? You know, oh, they want you to borrow. Well, I maxed out my credit cards. Well, you borrow more. All right, we have a plan. If you won't spend the money, it's the responsibility of the government to spend the money. Where do they get it? They have to steal it from somebody. You know, and then, of course, that invites the Fed in and the burden of debt. And that is what they've been doing for these last 4 years. But the whole problem was these events were predictable. The bubbles are there. The free market economists know about it. They say they're there. Watch out. They're going to burst. They did in 07 and 08. And since then, what have they tried to solve the problem of too much spending and too much debt? Spend more money, tax more money, regulate more, start more wars. I mean, it makes no sense. I think the American people are waking up. I am convinced you are way ahead of everybody in Washington, D.C. The people are waking up. Washington is sound asleep, so they have to hear our message loud and clear. You know what we want. But under these kind of conditions where government grows, governments can't grow without undermining personal liberty, whether it's economic liberty or personal liberty. And that is what is happening today. And just look at it. You know, we are now a country that is giving up our liberties for the sense of security, whether it's economic security or personal security. This is especially a consequence of 9/11. Because of the misinterpretation of exactly what was behind 9/11, and they said, oh, that's a big problem because they hate us because we're free and that we're rich. That is not true. This is blowback. They're sick and tired of us bombing their countries. They're sick and tired of us occupying their countries. When there is an emergency, it's always used to perpetuate big government. So there were a couple things had been laid out in plans for years. The invasion of Iraq was known by me and others as early as 1998. That is when they started on it, because I started talking about it in 1998. But 9/11 That was the first thing they talked about. Now's our chance. They weren't worried too much about going after bin Laden. It took them 10 years to do that. They occupied 2 countries before they finally found him. But they used that as the excuse to go in. But what about the right afterwards? What did they do for us? Did they say that that we have to protect the people? No. We have to put more burdens. We have to take liberties away from their people. So they passed a law that they had been trying to pass for years, and that was called the Patriot Act. So if and when we get our republic back, the repeal of the Patriot Act will be on the top of the list. The TSA will not have the authority to touch us without a search warrant at the airport. A lot of members of Congress told me they couldn't vote against it because it was tough times and it was called the Patriot Act. Who could vote against the Patriot Act? I think most people who have paid any attention to what's in Washington, if you look at a title, you can assume they're doing exactly the opposite of what the title says. Now, if that bill would have been called Repeal the Fourth Amendment Act, maybe they wouldn't quite have been so anxious to do it. So when we want to repeal the Patriot Act, what we'll do is we'll say Restore the Fourth Amendment Act. Maybe we'll get some more votes. There has been a steady erosion of our personal liberties. And I see personal liberties, social liberties, exactly like I see economic liberties. They're one and the same. But since the early 70s, there has been erosion of our personal privacy for a couple reasons. One, financial privacy with the IRS, so they have to know every single financial transaction. But also, there's another onerous war going on against the American people here. Always well-intended, and that is the war on drugs, which is a total failure. But it's used once again to go into our houses without proper search warrants. The ability to come into our houses, and this is all levels of government. They come into the house, they have these SWAT teams, they come in, and they are just positive they have the right place and they're going to arrest somebody. They might be smoking marijuana, and they're going to get them. And they break in, and sometimes they kill people. They shoot people, and then they find out that they're in the wrong house. This is what the revolution was fought about: keeping the government out of their house unless they have a proper search warrant. Some of our laws are just our laws are being changed by the president's edict. The president just a year ago announced that because he was the commander-in-chief, he had the authority to assassinate American citizens. Somebody asked him where did he get his authority, because he's an expert on the Constitution, took an oath to obey it. He says, well, whatever is not prohibited in the Constitution, he's allowed to do. That's not the way it is. He's only allowed to do the things that he is explicitly told he's allowed to do, and the rest he's not allowed to do. That, of course, is what they tried to get that message out. They tried Article 1, Section 8. This is what we're allowed to do, nothing else. Amendment number 9 and number 10 tried to emphasize this, but of course it hasn't been able to restrain those who believe in big government. But the president proved his point. He has, and American citizens have been assassinated. And no charges made, nothing, but, quite possibly some bad people. But one person that was assassinated was the son of al-Awlaki, who was the real suspect in this whole deal. His son was 16 years old. He was out in the backyard with his cousin barbecuing, and they killed him with a drone. And you wonder why. First killing somebody in another country with a drone, it seems like they might get annoyed. What would we do if somebody did that to one of us? We'd be furious about that, and we'd all be together, and we would detest the notion. This is why it was rather strange when I suggested one time in a debate, why don't we use the golden rule when we write down and design our foreign policy? Of course, the reception for that wasn't quite as nice as what you've given, because I think before I got the sentence done, they were booing me. And I thought, wow, what's going on in this country? That's why we need more people like you, and our numbers are growing. That is true. But we do need a big house cleaning in Washington, because the Congress isn't doing much to restrain the executive branch or the judicial branch. The Congress passed the law, a National Defense Authorization Act. And they gave it to the President in December, so the President celebrated the new year by signing that bill. And of course, what that does, it repeals posse comitatus. It says now that the military can arrest American citizens, which they should never be able to do in civil law. And they also say that you do not have to have charges. You don't have a trial. You don't even have an attorney, and you can be put away in a secret prison indefinitely. That's what's on the law on the books right now. So let's make sure that we work very hard and prevent this economic crisis that could come with a breakdown of a dollar. That would be chaotic. You know, and people say, well, this is strange. This is scaremongering. But what did our government do during World War II? And not many people could say boo about it. We rounded up thousands of Japanese Americans and put them in a concentration camp. Just put them in camp for the duration of the war. I mean, it's been worse in other countries than that. I mean, there wasn't a systematic killing, but it was a systematic undermining, conditioning us to think that the government's all powerful under special circumstances. So that's why you never want these laws on the books. There will always be abuse. But for them to get the laws on the books, that gives them a lot of cover, and they think that there's, you know, no problems at all. So these are the kind of things that have to change. Now, there was one part of that bill that was more egregious than got passed. The one part, and it said that if you were called into court and you were charged with something, and they gave you a trial, you had your attorney, you had a trial, and you were found innocent, they still could hold you indefinitely forever, even if you were found innocent in a court. But fortunately, that was removed by a senator from Kentucky, and I was very glad. We need to, ask the basic question, what should the role of government be? Should it be to take care of us from cradle to grave? Should we have a welfare state? No, it doesn't work. If the government then assumes they have a responsibility to tell us what we can do about our own bodies and our own lives and our own habits, that means the government can protect us against, or they want to protect us against ourselves. That is embarking on the most mischievous government. It is an absolute abuse of our liberties, and that is what they're doing. They're trying to protect us from ourselves, because we're all possibly can endanger ourselves with what we do. All our habits, everything we do, from eating to exercising to smoking and drinking, and all kinds of habits. Maybe we don't sleep a long time at night. Governments will come in a totalitarian society, they tell you how much exercise you're supposed to get. Now, these might be good things, but it's not the role of government to be telling us how to run our lives. That we generally recognize that our spiritual life and our religious lives are our own, and the government's not supposed to be meddling. And we do a pretty good job of that, and we're pretty tolerant. Some people have no religious beliefs. Others have different ones that we might not understand or know about or approve of, but we say that's their business, as long as you're not hurting people and killing people under the rules. And then also intellectually, we're allowed to read books. We can study communism. And communism, just think how many 100 million people died because of these bad ideas. They're very, very dangerous. And yet we're allowed to do that. But when it comes to putting something in your body, It's the government has to tell you whether you can or not. They're down to the point now where they tell you whether you can drink raw milk or not. That's pretty bad. But it also hinders our rights to go to alternative things. What if you believe in alternative medicine? What if you want to use something else? You should have the right to do that. If you have a right to your life and your liberty and run your own life, you have to be responsible. If you do something wrong, you cannot go to your neighbor or to your government and demand that you be taken care of. But you also should be able to keep the fruits of your labor. If you work hard and save, then you get to keep what you earn. Now, the wonderful thing is that we have an answer for all this. It's found in more freedom, not less freedom, because freedom should bring us together. I think it's really miraculous how it should, and it can bring people together, and I think it did in our early history. And that is that, first of all, in our early history, certain groups were punished unfairly. They were seen as a collective, and we punish people because they belong to a group. But we don't get our rights because we belong to a group. I don't like hyphenated rights. We get our rights because we're individuals. But you should never be punished, but you should never get benefits either because you belong to a particular group. But if there's diversity in all our habits, all our intellectual pursuits, and how we spend our money, we should all come together because we want freedom of choice on what we do. And that means that people of all walks of life should come in and join and say, yes, I want my freedom because I want my life. And I want to run my own life as I should choose. And therefore, the only thing that we have to ask of each other is when people spend their money the way you don't think they should, or they have a personal lifestyle that you don't approve of, you just have to walk away and say, that's your business, just don't touch me in my life. You know, in our early history, obviously the founders warned us about these problems. And Samuel Adams said that it would be difficult, but he suggested that don't be in despair, if you don't have a majority. And obviously, nobody ever gets a majority. 51%. 51% didn't vote in communism. 51% didn't found this country. Leaders found the country. A small number of people. And he explained it, same guys explained it by saying, it isn't a majority that is necessary, it's the minority. And I rate determined minority keen on starting brush fires of liberty in the minds of men. And that is what we have gone. We're making progress, and Franklin said, those who expect to reap the benefits of liberty must, like men, undergo the fatigue of supporting it. And that is what is necessary. Now, if you come to these conclusions and feel strongly about it, actually, I believe the burden is greater on those who understand these issues than those who will never care that much or never get involved. They may even be voters, but they don't know who they're going to vote for until the day before, but they don't get involved. So if you belong to the group that wants to change things, there's a greater burden on each and every one of us. And I think there's several things that we have to do as individuals. First, we have to study and know the issues to know how to defend our position. And then we have to make ourselves available, and believe me, there's always going to be a job. But it might be different for every single one of us. Some are candidates, and some raise money, some are volunteers, who knows what. But there's always something available if you really believe in something. And this is what's happening today. Our numbers are growing. The internet has been a fantastic friend of freedom because we've been able to communicate and get the information so necessary to make the changes. Also, what this has done in recent years has been a revival revival of a lot of people who felt frustrated and standing by. Some never voted, some dropped out, and they're just watching, and they figure, what's the difference, what's the difference? A lot of those individuals that I call part of a remnant, people who knew and understood it, but now they're feeling less frustrated and believe there's something changing. And where I am convinced is when I meet the young people on the college campuses. Believe me, these views are alive and well and growing by leaps and bounds. So there's every reason to be optimistic. Freedom is a new issue, new idea. A lot of times they accuse us of wanting going back to the Dark Ages. Believe me, the ones who are wanting to go back to the Dark Ages are promoting big government. They're promoting tyranny. Tyranny's been around for centuries, if not thousands of years. It's freedom that is the new message, and that is what is coming alive in this country. We're picking up the pieces where they were left off 100 years ago, and we can not only pick up the pieces there, but we can refine it and advance the cause of liberty. That is the road to peace and prosperity and making America great. Thank you very much.
Everybody?